Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is 10:35 on a Saturday, a few days after Christmas. Kind of going into food detox and always eat a ton of food on the holidays, and it was a great time. And slowly getting back into kind of normal. I always love. I mean, I get so into Christmas, but then I'm like, it's funny because like the day after Christmas, I'm kind of happy it's all over with. I usually take down my Christmas decorations pretty quick, even though I love really get into Christmas, but I don't usually get into the Christmas spirit until like the week before or so. Like it hits all of a sudden, and then I get way into it, and then well, being that this is a movie channel, I get totally into movies, Christmas movies. So then I like overdose for like 2 or 3 days straight. I'll pick like a stack of movies, and I'll just like watch each one. Oh, go through the whole pile, wrap presents, do the whole thing, and then it's weird. And then like the day after, I'm like I feel like I got it out of my system. And then, but I always like this period, like when Christmas is kind of in the past, but you're still in Christmas season, and it's kind of this, like you still have the feeling of the kind of the celebration, but yet it's like back to kind of normal stuff. Like normal back to kind of a normal routine, sort of say, that's you kind of go back to your normal thing of like not eating 10,000 Christmas cookies a day, hopefully, and wrapping presents and all the stuff. So, but for me, again, Christmas is a big thing as far as movies go. So I've been talking about, the next few shows are all about the movies that I got for Christmas. We watched a shit ton of movies on Christmas Eve and especially Christmas Day. We watched I went over to my folks for Christmas, and I think I on Christmas Day like we watched something like 4 movies. Like it was kind of crazy, but it's awesome. It's kind of business as usual for us as a family. Like so, it's a fun thing that we all really enjoy. So, and my parents, when it comes to movies and different genres, they're pretty open to, whatever, for the most part. My dad, for a long time, did not like horror films, and they would give him nightmares, they would bother him. But my mom is so into horror films. In the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, he'll watch horror movies now. It's kind of funny. Like I can bring any kind of horror movie over there. Usually when I go over there, more so during the holidays, because then there's like a lot more time, and then I'll get more movies. When I go over there for like dinner, like whenever I go over there for dinner, I usually bring at least 1 or 2 movies. But usually it's like more low key, and I just it's not like a movie marathon kind of situation. But usually like holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, it's usually full on movie marathon mode. But I always bring, definitely in those cases, I usually always try to snag up a new horror film, and he's open to watching them. So so now we can watch. Usually we watch anything. Uh, so, but this week I've been covering all of the movies that we watched. One that I just upload. Well, it's just about ready to be uploaded, and just a absolutely. I was kind of blown away by this movie. Definitely, easily, this movie blew away every movie in the pile. I got 4 movies for Christmas. Usually, what I do, I go to Opera House Video a couple of days before Christmas Eve, because the movies aren't due back until uh, the day after Christmas, which was yesterday, Friday, Box Day. So I usually go and snag up a bunch of movies before Christmas Eve, because Christmas Eve, the holidays are a big time for people to rent movies, big time. So I try to go a little bit earlier to beat the rush, because a lot of the times at Opera House Video, like they don't have more than one copy of a film. I mean, back when you had the franchises, with video stores like Blockbuster, I remember like you would go in there and you say you wanted like a Top Gun movie, and they'd have like 10 copies of that movie. They'd have multiple copies of each movie. But with Opera House Video, it's occasionally they'll have more than one copy, but usually it's just first come first serve. I much rather support that kind of a thing than some bullshit corporation. But so I typically try to go a little bit earlier to beat the rush, because they do get busy during the holidays, which is awesome, especially in this day and age. And and it'll be up today, very very soon. As soon as I get done shooting this video. The best movie I saw easily. It blew away every movie. It really did. It just leveled them. Life of Chuck. It's a Mike Flanagan film. It's a Stephen King adaptation. Just an incredible film. I was like, what? Where did this movie come from? I didn't know it was a Mike Flanagan film till the end, to the credits, which was a really big surprise, because I'm like, okay, this makes sense, because this movie is so so well done. It's just an impeccable movie. So great. And for this year, 2025, between, as far as Stephen King adaptations, The Long Walk, which I got from Santa Claus, which I will watch pretty soon on Blu-ray. Absolutely incredible film, which was also a Stephen King adaptation. And then The Life of Chuck is a Stephen King adaptation. And they're both incredibly different films, but amazing, amazing, amazing films. Definitely the two of the best movies of this year. But definitely out of the bunch of movies that I got today, I'm going to be talking about a movie that was directed by Ethan Hawke, Wildcat, and then also this other film, Neighborhood Watch, and then also a newer horror film that came out this year, Together, which was a movie that was really, really hyped up. So today I'm going to be talking about Wildcat, which is a movie that was, I had heard a little bit about this film, but it's a movie that was directed by Ethan Hawke. And I do love Ethan Hawke. I think he has an amazing, I mean, just such a rich career, such a great actor, a really, really just incredible actor. Probably, one of my favorite films of his is Gattaca. I absolutely love that movie. I don't own it on Blu-ray. I don't even own that film, I don't think at all. But it's a science fiction film, but just absolutely amazing. Just such a great film. But he's done so many great films, and I think he's done other projects where he has directed. But I didn't. I got this movie because this movie, I knew a little bit about it. I didn't know what it was about. I kind of got this sense from this movie, from what I had heard, and the little that I had read about Wildcat was that this was going to be more of a, kind of an art house film, a little bit on the experimental side. I wasn't, I don't know, like super excited to see it. I kind of felt like it was probably going to be maybe a little too slow and maybe a little on the boring side. But I ended up getting it for Christmas to, I like to usually get a variety of movies, some action movies, a horror movie, maybe a comedy if there is something like that, which are hard to find these days, and a drama, so I like, my folks tend to like action movies, and they do like dramas quite a bit. So I try to get, I always try to get a variety. So that's why I decided to get Wildcat. And Wildcat also, the other thing that was kind of interesting is it stars Maya Hawke, who is Ethan Hawke's daughter, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing. And then also his son, Levon Hawke, which I didn't know Ethan Hawke had a son, and they are both the stars. And the main star, I should say, of this movie is Maya Hawke. Ethan Hawke is not in this film. He is totally acting as the director in this film. The other thing that was a nice surprise is Laura Linney is in this film, who is an amazing actress. She's kind of always been one of my favorite actresses, but I haven't seen her in anything in a long time. Vincent D'Onofrio is also in this film, who is just really, really great. And it's an interesting movie until it's not. It's kind of a biopic. It has such an incredible opening for this film. It's kind of like there's this whole thing of where it's hard to describe, but it's kind of like this period piece kind of opening where it's like almost like a trailer that was like shot in like I think like the 30s or 40s, and that has that's kind of an introduction to this film, Wildcat. But it's so good. It's so awesome. The music is great. The way it's shot, the way it's edited, like you really feel like you're in this time machine and you're traveled back to like the 40s. And it's so awesome. It's got such a cool little opening before the actual story starts. And it is tied to what the movie is about. I mean, you could say this movie is kind of a biopic, more or less. It's about a writer, Flannery O'Connor, and it's basically told from like her perspective. And she was a pretty famous writer. She died pretty tragically she was stricken with the disease lupus, and during that time, there was no cure for it when she was alive. Flannery O'Connor was a writer. Flannery O'Connor was a writer, and she was most well known for her Southern Gothic stories. In particular, in her main, I guess one of her most popular stories is A Good Man is Hard to Find, known for dark humor, grotesque characters, sudden violence, and profound Catholic themes exploring grace and faith and redemption in the American South. So this film kind of acts as a kind of like a biopic about her, and it is kind of the way the narrative is kind of laid out with this film is it's kind of told through a lot of the characters that she creates, kind of like through her art. So the story is kind of about it bounces back and forth between her and her real life struggles with her being sick, and then her family and who she is. But then it bounces back to where there's all these scenes of where she's like really observing people and watching people, and she's always creating these characters for what would become her books. So most of the story kind of bounces back and forth between this fictional reality and a nonfiction reality. But I think most of the story or the narrative kind of stays in the fictional realm. And so you get a lot of this, everything feels like you're in this kind of dream state. And so, and it's very ambiguous. It's kind of, has the film has a mysterious quality. And it's very interesting in that regard, like, because it's a biopic, but it's not like, and I didn't know anything about Flannery O'Connor before watching this movie, and it's kind of an interesting perspective, but I will say that it is ultimately, I don't know, I was really confused it was really hard to follow the narrative after a while. And it was kind of this thing of where, we're introduced to Flannery O'Connor in her life and kind of and she's aware that she's very sick and that she's going to die. So it's a pretty depressing film. And then it shifts into the story being told through these characters that she's creating for her books and for her future works. And she, and then there's like this thing of where Flannery O'Connor's meeting with her publisher at the company that publishes her books, and she has this, from a narrative perspective, she had this like very unorthodox way of explaining stories, not really conventional. And there's like a conversation which is kind of interesting between her and her publisher, where he kind of wants her to be, a little bit more traditional, because he felt like a lot of her work maybe more or less kind of gets lost in the weeds, where you can't really understand what's going on because it's kind of so ambiguous. And so she's really steadfast against that, and there's like a lot of conflict and tension. And then from there, the movie kind of goes into an area where it kind of goes into the story in kind of a biographical kind of way, where it's all mostly told from her fictional characters that she's creating. And it's really interesting for about the first 35 minutes or so. But then, and it does go back, and after a while, it does go back and forth quite a bit from the fictional character's perspective to her actual reality. And there were times where it switches back quite a bit to where I honestly was just lost, and I didn't understand really what was going on. And it was kind of the same thing over and over again, as far as the way it was laid out, that this film was going to be, very, very, I guess, artsy in a way, but that's a kind of a bad way to describe it. But it is an art house film. But I will say that this film ultimately is like uber pretentious, and doesn't know kind of when to say when. And the other thing too, like there are a lot of characters in this film, especially because it is bouncing back between the people in her real life and then all of these characters that she's creating. And that's kind of where more or less the majority of the story is being told from, like, that perspective. And I honestly do not like any of the characters, because they all come across as like just incredibly pretentious people that you would never in a million years want to be trapped in a room with, because they come across as really conceited, unlikable, self-absorbed, and really, really kind of conceited. And I found that, like, all of these characters just felt so unappealing, and it was just like, I could not believe how pretentious this movie got over time. And I found myself not liking any of these people, because I'm like, these people are a bunch of, like, yeah, they're very, and the characters, they're very, there's a lot of they all have a high intellect, they're all, like, very smart, but they're also, there's nothing about them that feels real, and they just come across as incredibly pretentious. And it felt like this movie, about the 35-minute mark, because there's so much of this stuff going on, that this movie just kind of went up its own ass. And it goes down this kind of stereotypical way, or thing, that of this film is just this highfalutin kind of armchair intellectual, self-absorbed, pretentious art house film. And unfortunately, that's a perception sometimes people have of, say, art house cinema. Like, if you watch it, sometimes people feel that, like, and I think it's a stance of ignorance, but, like, when you look at the films of Truffaut, who just an amazing director, incredible director, one of the greatest directors, French director, or like Buñuel, another French director, or um, Ingmar Bergman. True art house directors, truly forces of nature and high cinema, but incredibly brilliant. There is that perspective that people have of European cinema at times, of where it can come across as like uber pretentious, and just in general, some films can be, can get so weighted and bogged down on having to really, tell a story in a very overtly intellectual way, and it can kind of get in the way of just kind of enjoying a good story. Those directors that I mentioned were masters of that, and they could find that balance. This film, Ethan Hawke is not that as a director, and I think that this movie does legitimately get completely lost in the woods. And we didn't make it all the way through. We ended up taking this film out, and we put in a different movie. We got probably into maybe about 50 minutes into about the 50-minute mark was when it started to, this film seriously was starting to give me a headache. And the thing was really weird was I loved this opening, and it was so great the way this film started. But it was kind of an exhausting film because of how all of the characters I just felt were, I was kind of repelled by all of the characters. I didn't care about any of them. They just all came across as like, well, more or less as these pretentious assholes. Like, yeah, they're probably smarter than I am. They've read more books than I have, and they could probably quote various you know passages from philosophy books quicker than I could, but I wouldn't want to be in a room with people who are insistent on, where you're maybe having just a conversation, but they're kind of insistent on coming across as someone who is very smart, but they have this weird insistence that they have to use, big words, and that they're kind of talking down to you the whole time. And the whole film has that vibe. The whole film has that vibe throughout. And ultimately, to watch a movie, to get into a movie, the main thing is, regardless of genre or the style or whatever, obviously the story is first and foremost. And you have to be able to, kind of identify with the characters, and you want to have empathy towards the characters. You want to care about them, even if they're, really, troubled people, or whether they're just even despicable people, or just people who are, just really, characters you really, really care about. And I felt like the way it was laid out, and from this very like pseudo intellectual thing that was this constant barrage, that where there was no levity, I just was like, man, I can't do it. I just can't do it. It's just too much. And it turned me off to where I did not care about any of these characters, and it just gave me a headache. So I couldn't take it. And the thing that was interesting, and it occurred to me when I was watching Life of Chuck, which is just a phenomenal movie, and that movie I'm going to upload in a minute or two to the channel. And in some regards, even though I would say it might be a little bit of a stretch to say this, when I was watching The Life of Chuck, and I was like really into that movie, and it was interesting too, because we watched that movie. It was pretty much like the fourth movie that we watched. We watched it on Christmas Eve, or Christmas Day night. After we had watched a few movies, and we, had eaten a bunch of food, and, it was a long day, and doing presents and all that stuff. I was pretty tired. I was pretty, like, starting to cash out at that point. And then we put in Life of Chuck, and then I was just like, wow, like, this is like within 5 or 10 minutes, I was just like totally absorbed into this movie, and I felt it like rejuvenated me. But an interesting thing happened because we had the first movie I think we started was it might have been Wildcat. It might have been the first movie that I watched that day with my folks. And again, at the 15-minute mark, we took it out. We just couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. And so while I was watching Life of Chuck, and I was really into it, and I was just like, this movie's awesome, and I don't know where it's going to go. I care about all the characters. It's a beautiful story. It's also, it definitely is kind of a dark film. It has a lot of tragedy, but it's very uplifting, and it's not cliche in any way. It's really original. I mean, just everything about it. And but it has such a unique structure, the way the story is laid out, and it follows this main character Chuck, who is, it follows him from when he's a kid to when he's becoming an adult to where he's a fully realized man, and it's about him where he finds out midway through his life that he's going to die pretty young, and so it's him trying to come to grips with that, and yet trying to like live a real loving life and fulfilling life. And the whole film is done in this way. It's shot in this way where there's like three chapters, and it's told from. It starts with chapter three and works its way back. I think that's how it worked. So very original, really unique, and it does kind of jump all over the place. And I think if it wasn't directed by Mike Flanagan, who is one of the best directors, period, working today in movies, and especially horror films, if it was somebody less qualified, that movie could have been a mess. Like it could have like been so um, convoluted. It wouldn't have been cohesive. But Life of Chuck was so cohesive. I mean, and it took a lot of chances, it took a lot of risks with like how the narrative structure was. It was not conventional in any way, shape, or form. It was unexpected where the film would go. It was super fresh. I had never read the story of Life of Chuck, but I probably will now. And so I thought, okay, well, Wildcat, again, very different movie, but similar in that they both directors, Ethan Hawke in Wildcat's case, and in Mike Flanagan in Life of Chuck, both of them, the way they wanted to approach these films narratively, they were kind of swinging for the fences and trying to really do something unique, very outside the box, and that can be, that can go something like that can go. Well, a film in general can anyway, but when you're taking a real risk as far as how you're gonna like you're setting out as a filmmaker to take a big risk to how to tell a story, and your whole structure is going to be really really unconventional and against the norm to a degree, and it has this broken up time. You're telling the storyline is kind of being told from where it's literally out of order, and it's always from where you're using different perspectives from the different characters. That can be a mess. And I'm thinking in that regard, Wildcat and Life of Chuck are very similar, even though they're very different movies. But in that regard, they're very similar. And to me, it was like so clear as day as to, because with Life of Chuck, I knew even when it got a little bit out there and kind of ambiguous and even mysterious, and I had to think a little bit as to what was going on. I knew exactly where I was in the story the whole time. And I loved all the characters. All the dots were connected. It all made sense. It was just a beautifully done film. And Wildcat, I felt like I just totally was lost in the woods. Like it just never really. There were times where I literally didn't know, and I'm kind of a stupid person, but maybe that's it. But I literally there were moments in the film, like maybe by the 40-minute mark in Wildcat, where I literally had no idea. I was lost in the dark. I had no idea where I was. I didn't know what direction I was going in. I couldn't see in front of me. I couldn't see where any of this was going. It didn't make any sense. And it was kind of the same thing. The same thing. Oh, it felt like they had this interesting thing what they were doing with what like Ethan Hawke's choices were to tell the story. And it was kind of interesting and kind of a newer concept. But it was, and then he just kind of took that same thing that was established and just kind of did it over and over and over again, where it felt like it was exhausting and it didn't go anywhere. There was no, it never, the dots were never connected, you know. So I just didn't make it. And to me, it was like, wow, okay, this is the difference between somebody who can really tell a story that is complex, or just somebody who can tell a story, and somebody who can't really tell a story. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend this movie, and it's super dry. It's a pretty long film. I think it's like 2 hours and 2 hours and something, and I couldn't make it all the way through. I couldn't even make it all the way through. Um, it's very slow, very very slow. It's pretty depressing for obvious reasons, but it's very slow to the point of where it's just kind of boring, and it's the same thing over and over again. I didn't make it all the way through. Yeah, it really got a little bit too lofty and ambiguous. So I would take, and I have to say, even the performances in this film, again, they were kind of interesting until they weren't. Um, Maya Hawke is the star, Ethan Hawke's daughter, and she plays Flannery O'Connor, the writer. And she's a really good actress, but I felt like she um, is in this movie so much, and she actually, her character actually becomes, to a degree, one of these fictional characters that she creates. So she's like playing, in some ways, she's like playing multiple roles throughout this movie, and I felt like it was bad. Like I don't, no disrespect to her, because I mean, she's a great actress, but she doesn't have like the chops that like a Laura Linney has. Even that I felt like was great, but until it just like it was exhausting the way they kind of wrote her character, and it just didn't go anywhere after a while. I just felt like her acting is not up to par to where she took on so much work with this movie, and I feel like she doesn't have that ability to really pull off something so fucking ambitious as this movie is, because it is. Wildcat is incredibly ambitious. I will give it that. It definitely, it definitely was going for it and going for some new kind of high concept, like trying to make a high concept, literary based art house film. And so I do give it that it was, you know, they were going for something new, but it they just couldn't connect the dots, unfortunately. So I would take a hard pass on seeing Wildcat. But anyway, thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.